Well, I'm extremely honored to be here tonight for many reasons. One of them is that this foundation has been a home and a community for me for many, many, many years now. And I love that we have this chance to gather as SAG-AFTRA members, especially because they give us opportunities to speak with people like you, Gloria, about incredible content like this. So I wanted to just start off by asking, you've been a leader in the feminist movement as an activist for a long time now. A long time. Over half a century. And yet this is the first show you've chosen to produce. And this is an extraordinary way to approach it. But I'm just curious, why now and why this?
It was kind of a magical moment of coming together because I was at a meeting that was a Google idea camp. And Shane Smith, who is one of the founders of Vice, was there, and I was saying some things that I have said many, many times before, which is really about violence against females worldwide. Both that it is the biggest indicator of all other violence, that is, whether there's violence in the streets or willingness to use military violence. It tends to be what we see first. It normalizes the idea that one group is meant to dominate the other. And also that now it's so prevalent if you count up everything from the daughter deficit and the son surplus in Asia to domestic violence here, which is very, very high, to female genital mutilation, sexualized violence in war zones, all of it. It means that now, for the first time, there are fewer females on Earth than males. And when Shane heard that, I think he got tears in his eyes, actually. I don't know, but I mean, it hit him. And he said, okay, we have to talk about it. And Amy Richards, my associate, we were both there. And so when we came back to New York, he said, let's do this. So it happened, and I have to say that I know that Vice is viewed as a guy thing, right? Was viewed as a guy thing, right? In fact, we made buttons for everybody who did this series that said, I put the V in Vice. But they chose the correspondents. I mean, you've seen one, but I hope you see the others, because there's 7 fantastic women correspondents from all over the world, multilingual, just such good journalists and so brave. They made it the most like being there yourself. And so I have to say it just came together. I mean, I don't take credit for it. It was just like a harmonic convergence.
It's so organic and yet so perfect because you're bringing it to a network traditionally watched by men, a brand that is associated with men. And you make it something that affects and interests them because in each episode you make the point that the state of women in each society is an indicator of how that society is faring. So it takes it away from being a women's issue and just makes it a human issue, which I think is why it's so effective. I'm curious because so many actors are also producers. And I'm curious if you learned anything from this process that surprised you that you could offer as advice for people creating or wanting to create socially conscious content.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you are an actor and a director. I mean, people want to know how that happened too. But I think I learned that it's possible to make something that is like being there. Now, constructed documentaries that can tell you history and analysis are really important. I'm not saying that's not important, but this was different. These were people walking around asking questions in a way that didn't presume the answer, but responding like human beings, not pretending they had no emotions. Yeah. So I think, even though I have to say it's true that you in this room have a special advantage because we can empathize with each other. You know, we produce oxytocin, that thing that when you hold a baby, male or female, you're flooded with, or when you see somebody in trouble, you help. That's how the species survives. We can only produce oxytocin when we're together as we are now. But I would say that these documentaries are the closest thing to oxytocin because they are like walking around and being there yourself. And I didn't think that was possible before.
It's so apparent in this episode because I found myself really discovering the story along with the correspondent as she kind of discovered that perhaps there was more to what she was hearing than at first presented. For instance, I found the FARC to be a pretty utopian society for women. In the first 10 minutes, I thought, well, this sounds kind of great. I mean, maybe I should sign up. They're treated equally. You know, they seemed really happy. They were allowed to have relationships, but, you know, the roles were very equal. And then as it unfolds and you hear a little bit more about life for a woman there, and of course the challenges and pitfalls and some really scary things, then I found myself able to empathize in a human way, which is different than just analyzing data. So I thought that was so well told. And it sounds like that was a producerial choice.
Well, it's just, that's a fact of life, actually. I mean, because it is true that women are, you might say, a surplus labor force for the revolution, if you know what I mean. So when there are tough times, we are welcome. I mean, we had the experience here with World War II, and then after the war, it was back to the kitchen, right? With government-subsidized documentaries telling you to get back in the kitchen. And it happened in Algeria. I mean, there were, you know, women were so much part of the revolution and hoped that they had earned their own place, and then it was back into a very traditional religious place, and there were massive suicides afterwards. I mean, you know, we have to be able to be an equal part of the rebellion as well as an equal part of what we're going home to. Yes. And that is not true. It's not true of FARC. And also women who are now being put back into regular society are being, I mean, literally, I met a woman the other day at the UN who was telling me they were trying to get them to wear high heels. I said, excuse me? You know, I mean, what is that about? You know, you can choose if you, I don't know. I mean, just to go back to this traditional role, it's one of the things we couldn't talk about, really, because there wasn't that kind of commentary. But it's one of the things I hope we think about from seeing this, that this is a universal event in varying degrees, that you're used in the revolution and then supposed to go back to your subservient role afterward.
And where is that gray area? Is it possible to have the compromise? I mean, I guess my real question is it possible to be an active part of the revolution as a woman and have a family? Or is the FARC correct in prohibiting women from being able to have children? I mean, I find myself with much lower stakes questioning that all the time. Is it possible to be as active and useful a member of society when you are also caring for and responsible for a family?
I think you have just put your finger on the exact... As far as I can know, which is not very far, if we look at the Native American cultures here, if we look at the Kwe and the San in Africa, which is actually where we all came from before they wandered around and populated the world, right? If we look at the Dalits in India, if we look at the oldest cultures, which I'm sorry to say we do not study. We don't start to study people when people started. We start when colonialism and racism and all kinds of bad stuff, and patriarchy started. Okay. I think in the original groups in which we lived, both women and men cared for children. And there were not roles as we think of them, masculine and feminine roles. And there were not, as far as I can tell, in those languages, there were not even gendered pronouns. There were not he and she. People were people. What a concept, right? And that, I think you've come upon the whole ball game here, because how women become whole people, in our current culture anyway, is to become active outside the home, and how men become whole people is to be active inside the home. And until men are raising children as much as women are, men won't be able to be whole people, and kids won't grow up knowing that men can be as loving and nurturing as women can, which of course they can. Exactly. And that we just, it's the whole problem. Yes. to first of all, to force women to have children they don't choose to have, which is the nature of patriarchy. That's what it's all about. That's what most of religion is about, let's face it. That's what, not spirituality, it's something different, but and to be the sole caretakers for those children, then we have started a hierarchy. Then we have begun the whole bonkers idea that human beings are ranked instead of linked. We are linked, we are not ranked. And there's gender we made up. We can unmake it up. We made up race. We can unmake it up. I mean, our individual differences and our shared humanity is the whole point. Anyway, obviously you've hit my
well,
nerve.
It's so fascinating to put it in the context of relating ourselves to human beings from a long time ago, as opposed to animals, because often this argument goes back to a biological stance of, well, if you look at animals, chickens, the male chicken is brought in just to mate, and then female chickens are left to raise the children alone. And same thing with sheep, same thing with cows. And you hear it over and over again. And as a woman, it's sort of depressing, because you think, wait, so am I supposed to accept that actually I'm just like a goat, and that I should just accept that it's really arbitrary that we now expect the male goat to live with the female goat? And it's like, no, because humans weren't always doing it.
I just want to say that male penguins feed baby penguins by coughing up the lining of their throats, and they hatch the eggs. Excuse me? Yes. I mean, we can find a lot of examples, and male lions are nurturing parents too. Ms. Magazine once did a whole thing on animals in which males were nurturing parents.
That's great.
I mean, you can tell really nice people because they study elephants.
Yes. Yes.
You can tell not so nice people because they study only certain kinds of gorillas. I mean, it's like people are looking for what they need to prove. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. And it's that for specifically these women in Colombia, when the extremes seem so limiting, it's either all or nothing. You're either a revolutionary in the jungle, not allowed to have a child no matter what, or you are back in your kitchen at home and held at a very low level of society. And with what I'm sure you're all aware, last night, the peace talks in Havana between the FARC and the Colombian government means that perhaps there's a way for these women to reintegrate into society. Of course, it will be so challenging as it was in those in other places where the same thing happened. But I wonder, what they're going through is an extreme version of what we're all going through, is that sort of gray area of, can women be both members of the revolution, active members of society, and obviously caretakers? The answer is obviously yes, but it's getting everyone to that place.
Yeah, it's just, we just all need to decide together, okay? When all the studies show that when you get a group of men together, given the idea of masculinity, I mean, it doesn't have to be this way, but they are likely to choose the most assertive or aggressive solution, even if it's wrong. And when you get a group of women together, we're likely to choose the most conciliatory, a cooperative solution, even if it's wrong. So what we need is to be all together. Yeah. So we have all the alternatives. And the problem is, sometimes I think the world is composed of two kinds of people. People who divide everything into two and those who don't, okay? If we just stop dividing everything into two, into masculine and feminine, it's bullshit. We are human. We are incredibly complicated and nuanced, and we're whole people. We just have to get out of those categories. I'm not myself fully convinced that violent means can reach a peaceful ends. And in our own very wise Native American predecessor cultures here, well, and a lot of them are still here in spite of everything, they make very clear things like, you may choose to be violent if you want, but you have to know that it takes 4 generations to heal one act of violence. Wow. They know that. Okay, we need to hear that. So I think we can be part of revolutions if we're really part of revolutions, if we're really choosing the means and not just dealing with the ends.
Yes. I'm curious if there will be a second season of this show, and if so, what are some stories that you'd like to tell with it?
Well, that's, we haven't sat down and really talked about this, and we will, and it's just, the world is full of possibilities. It's going to be very hard. Yeah. I mean, we are going to do more. It's going to be very hard because there's so many things we didn't say here. We didn't talk about female genital mutilation, for instance, which is a massive, massive problem. We didn't really talk about domestic violence, which in this country alone has killed way more Americans than have died in 2 wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and 9/11. I mean, in the same period of time. So we could continue that, and maybe I think we want to see, and there are so many women fighting back. And so, maybe that's a focus, both to look at those problems and to see the ways in which women are fighting back. We have to, think about it very carefully.
That's fantastic. Well, we'd like to open it up to the audience because that's why you're all here. I'll set that off with one question from an audience member. Your name's not on here. Question is, while beauty gives an advantage to performers of either sex, how can our unions work to equalize treatment on set, where women considered quote-unquote model types get preferential treatment for everything from camera time, meal breaks, clean bathrooms, etc.? Not every film needs the extras from Entourage. Hear, hear. I think that's definitely true. Especially because they must be so tired, those extras. They can't work all the time.
Well, the only reason that women are valued when we're young and less when we're old than men is all about childbirth. Hello? If we didn't have wombs, this wouldn't be happening, We're supposed to only be valuable when we can have children or are raising children. Hello, we have brains as well as wombs, so we just have to get out of all of this ageism stuff. I mean, it's really ridiculous. I mean, think of all the Meryl Streeps and Cecily Tysons in the world. We're missing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's so interesting. I remember one really kind of incredibly impactful moment when I was a young actress. I was 20 years old, and I found myself somehow at the same table as Tilda Swinton. And I, of course, just, stumbled out a question to her, and she said, I said, can you tell me anything about your experience? Just give me wisdom, something. And she said, wow. She said, all I can say is, I don't envy you. I wouldn't want to be the young ingenue. I wouldn't want to be a young actress because you are somehow forced to be everyone's perception of perfection, of the ideal. And as actresses get older, they're allowed to be more complex than that and more specific than that. And I thought it was so incredible because there's this complete bullshit misperception about Hollywood that all women are really desperate to be really young and that it's all like we all really wish we could stay 20 forever. Personally, I have found that the roles get a lot better once you're too old to play dumb. And I agree with you that if we just get rid of this ageism, we'd open up, this industry and every single other one to all this talent.
There's immense pressure, and I see from my women friends who are actors, to have all kinds of plastic surgery and to look ever younger and so on. And, I'm absolutely not criticizing anybody who gives into it because the pressure is the problem, not the individual. But I think to myself, it's like a guy with a bad toupee, do you know what I mean? You can't think about anything else, while you're...
So distracting.
So, I mean, why? Yeah. Right. No, I think, I gather that filmmaking is better in Europe. Do you find that true?
Yes.
That women are more, that everybody is more natural, or a little bit more natural?
Yes. I think it is a uniquely American obsession to have perfection on film, that this our beloved form of escapism must be unreal in this certain way, and we demand it and we reward that. I'm not quite sure why. I
tell you, it's about reproduction. Hello.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to that.
Yeah.
And I'm really a part of the problem.
No, you are part of the solution.
The solution, right?
Excuse me.
Exactly.
Right?
You can be a professional mother, and of course we all know this. And I have found, by the way, that having children only made me a better artist, and I think that the fact that Hollywood sort of discourages it discreetly in a sort of passive-aggressive way.
How do they discourage it?
There's this sense that while you are child rearing, you are sort of dead. And that you then must like return from the grave in perfect shape, probably better than you were before, to be like, no, I promise, I didn't have a baby, I didn't, look. And that is so odd, as opposed to saying, wow, this person maybe has a little more insight into humanity, emotional intelligence, because they have created another human being. We're not there yet. It's still a sense of you've given something up.
I was looking at Trump the other day when he was... No, I'm not going to go there. It's okay. But he was talking about how Hillary was a coward or not, but I don't know, something like that. I thought to myself, you have a baby. Can you imagine Trump?
Oh, God, it's so terrifying. My nightmare.
No, but, okay, it just seems to me fair that if women spend a year bearing and nurturing a baby, that then men spend that much more than half the time taking care of the baby.
Yeah.
Right? Why not?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, again, the crux of all of this is really that, and the struggle with how we can move that forward, how we can embrace it first within ourselves and believe it to be true.
Well, I'm verging on the unacceptable here, but I can't resist. Okay. The whole thing of patriarchal religions, it's partly jealousy of giving birth.
Right.
I mean, being able to give birth is like huge, it's a big thing.
And the epidural is really pretty fantastic high. I don't know. If
Well,
they sold that on the street, we'd
communion
all
or
be.
something.
I'm just kidding.
But I was reading a book on church architecture, and the guy is saying, like everybody knows it, that patriarchal religious structures are built to resemble the body of a woman because their basic act is to take over the power of giving birth. Okay, women give birth physically, but they take over the mythical spiritual power of giving birth. So there's always an outer entrance and inner entrance, labia majora, labia minora, and a vestibule in between is the same word. A vaginal aisle down the center, two curved ovarian structures on either side, and the altar in the middle where the miracle takes place, where men dressed in skirts sprinkle imitation birth fluid over a baby's head and say, yes, you were born of woman, you were born in sin, but if you obey the rules of the patriarchy, you can be reborn through the patriarchy, and we can go women one better, we can give you everlasting life. And no one can prove to the contrary, right? Okay.
Right.
So, because the whole idea of elaborate heavens did not seem to exist in original cultures, in old cultures. You went to join your ancestors on the other side of the mountain or something, but it wasn't this elaborate heaven and hell. This is all men, some men, I'm not accusing them, trying to take over the power of giving birth, to take it over mythically, right? And that is a lot of what religion is about. So,
fascinating.
I don't think it's not a weakness; it's a strength. But it's something, in a Cherokee friend of mine was explaining to me that men had been always part of the birth-giving process. For instance, when a woman was in labor, she leaned against her partner, and he put his arms around her like this and helped her push down. I mean, that it was a mutual thing. It wasn't an isolated thing off there. I really realized how pissed off women were when I realized they were being made to have babies against gravity by lying down this way instead of, hello? How terrible is that? Just for the convenience of the physician or something.
Exactly.
Right. So, it's not, we just have to get our heads out of the restrictions and think of the possibilities.
Amen. Well, I want to open up to the audience so you guys have a chance to stand up and ask questions. I think there's a mic back there if you want it.
And you can give us answers too, we could
yeah.
use some answers.
Please.
What was the name of that book that you're reading?
About the church architecture. I think pretty sure if you look up church architecture, you can find it online. I don't have the name of the book in my head, but I think it's in more than one place. And I wrote about it a little bit in my On the Road book, too. Right.
Thank you.
Hi, Gloria. So can you talk a little bit about violence against women on television? In the movie business, and so a lot of us have to play mothers of dying sons, or women who were murdered a lot, or women who are victims of various forms of violence. It's part of our industry. It's part of what we do in television. Can you talk about that and maybe talk about how we should deal with that? I mean, not as actors, but as viewers, what we can do to maybe combat some of that, or, I don't know, just your thoughts on it, I guess.
Well, I trust your wisdom. I'm not trying to put out shoulds here, but it just seems to me at a minimum we should make clear that it's not pleasurable. I mean, there's a whole school of thought that women enjoy being dominated or enjoy pain. At a minimum, we can make clear that that's not true. I mean, nature gives us pain, tells us there's danger and pleasure to say it's good. To get them exchanged takes a lot of child abuse and, a lot of bad stuff. So I think at least we can make it real, as, real violence hurts.
I think it's such a good point, because there's this fine line between responsibly reflecting society and violence against women that is occurring in society and showing that to viewers to educate them, and torture porn, which is what we see so often in content and are often asked to portray. And it's that choice. Wait, am I telling the story because it needs to be told? Is this a real thing? Or am I just feeding into some weird fantasy that's really unhealthy?
Yeah, I don't know if you'll find this helpful or not, but because I love words, I find it helpful to differentiate pornography from erotica, because porne actually means female slaves in Greek.
Wow.
And it means it's about female slavery, or men playing the role of females, but it's about pain and domination. Eros means love and has a connotation of free choice, mutuality. I fear that if we let pornography go uncriticized, it's like taking over all of sex. If you're against pornography, you're against sex. No, excuse me. I'm against pain. I'm not against sex. So erotica I find helpful, or erotic as an adjective, because we've spent a long time trying to explain that rape is not sex, it's violence. And I think we've got that across pretty much. But we have not got across that pornography is not erotica.
Next.
Hello, big fan. My question to you is this. What can I do to end the stigma against women like me who aren't married and who don't want children? I feel people look at me, liberals, conservatives, black, white. I say, do you have kids? No. Do you want children? No. And they look at me like I've got 3 heads. What is the best response that I can give them?
Well, since I have 3 heads too, well, I don't know. I've developed various responses over time. You can tell them that, there's no more reason for everybody with a womb to have children than everybody with vocal cords to be an opera singer. It's a gift, and I say, if I'm going to support the idea that women choose to have children, some of us have to choose not to. If everybody does it, it's not a choice. I'm doing a service here. I don't find it such a problem anymore. Maybe they've given up on me. But I just think if they see that you're happy, right, you're happy. I mean, that's what happened to me, because I discovered late in life that I assumed I had to get married and have children because that's my generation. But fortunately, the women's movement came along and said, you don't all have to live in the same way. Imagine that. And I discovered I was happy. So we nurture in different ways. We care for each other, but it doesn't all have to be in the same way.
Probably have time for
Hi.
2 more questions.
Okay.
2 more.
So I wanted to add on, when you started talking about the church, I got excited because I'm very into spirituality and mysticism. And in fact, the honoring of the female in the church, overwhelmingly, yes, the church has been patriarchal and oppressed women, I understand that. But there was wisdom within the church also of honoring the female as God, as the life giver, including the Gnostic Christian tradition. The Holy Trinity included Sophia, which is Greek for wisdom, but she was the Holy Spirit. So woman used to be honored. We know we had matriarchal societies as well, and I think within the bigger traditions there are those who know, those who did know, and I think some of that sacred architecture wasn't just an appropriation, but truly was from visionaries and honoring. And there's the shape of the vesica Pisces. I'm not sure if it's Pisces or Piscis, but it's basically a Venn diagram. It represents a vulva, and you'll see it in churches in Druidic, pagan traditions, but you'll see it in churches too. And even the rose windows in the cathedrals represents, the female glory. So I don't think it's only an appropriation. I think to some who know, and some original knowers and planners of those churches, there was an honoring of the divine feminine as God itself.
No, I agree with you that it used to be there, but it is now usually subordinate. I mean, if you take the trip on the Nile, you know, the traditional trip that goes from the oldest Nubian parts of the Nile to Cairo, you see the oldest ruins and carvings, and God is everything. You know, God is papyrus and butterflies and men and women and everything. And then you get back in the boat and you get off again. It's 1,000 years later or something, and there's less nature, and the goddess has a son and no daughter. Then, back in the boat, another era, the son has become a pharaoh, and the mother has become the throne, or the goddess on which and there's still less nature. Then you get to mosques, which are often built on top of old temples, just as in Europe. Churches are often built on top of much older spiritual structures. And there's no representation of females or nature allowed. Now, at the same time, I was reading a guy named Henry Breasted, who was a great Egyptologist of the early 1900s, I think. And he was saying, monotheism is but imperialism in religion. And I thought, how come nobody told me that? I mean, that the withdrawal of God from nature and females was over time a way of making it okay to dominate nature and females, to saying that you have dominion, as it says in the Bible, over nature and females. So it's still present, but it's not powerful or equal. You know, so, you know, I had to go have a procedure in a hospital, nothing, you know, much, but they make you sign a little form saying your religion just in case you drop dead, you know. So I was going to put none, and I thought, well, it's a little negative. So, so I put pagan. So the nurse said to me, what does that mean? I said, it just means you believe God is in all living things. I converted her on the spot.
Nicely done. That's amazing. Converted me, too. I'm pagan now, proudly pagan.
I just thank you for coming and speaking with us. I was just wondering if you think we as a country will ever stop being so divided on the topic of reproductive rights and abortion.
Yes, I do. I mean, I do because I've seen it changed so much over my lifetime. The majority of Americans totally agree that it should be up to the individual woman to decide, not the government. And the problem right now is severe because, for two reasons. One, the anti-abortion, anti-sex education, anti-everything forces that want to control reproduction have failed to get what they want in Washington, so they've gone to the state legislatures where they have a lot more power because they control a lot of those state legislatures. And, you know, they murdered 11 people in clinics and seemed surprised it didn't make them popular. So now they're trying to do it through eliminating the clinics themselves. So it's dangerous, and it's especially dangerous right now because we are on the verge of becoming a country that is no longer majority European American. So people will look at me sometimes and say, just straight up, you know, the white race is committing suicide through abortion, contraception, sex education, and so on. It's very racist, too. And so it's very severe right now. But it is not the majority opinion anymore. It is the majority opinion that each of us has power over our own bodies, men and women.
Wow. Well, is that it? That's unfortunately all our time. Thank you so much, Gloria. What an honor. Thank you.